Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 814. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. This week, we have a replay of an interview with Jim Benson from 2019. Jim and I focused on prioritization and how prioritization can be a reflection of more deep-seated problems. One of the ideas Jim shares is that processes are the social contract for getting work done. In the foreword of Mastering Work Intake that I wrote with Jeremy Willets, published in 2024, do you have your copy yet? We reflected that mastering stood on the shoulders of Jim's Why Limit Whip. Reflecting on the interview, I continue to see the relationship between work intake and the travails of prioritization. All of us at SPaMCAST look forward to your thoughts.
Jim's bio. Jim's career path has taken him through government agencies, Fortune 100 companies, and startups. Throughout them all, his passion has remained consistent, applying new technologies to work groups. In each case, asking how they can be leveraged to collaborate and cooperate more effectively. Jim loves ideas, creation, and building opportunities. He loves working with teams who are passionate about the future, pushing boundaries and inclusion. His goal with all technologies is to increase beneficial contact between people and reduce the bureaucratic noise, which so often tends to increase costs and destroy capability and creativity. Jim is the author of the Shingo Research Award-winning book, Personal Kanban. There's a link in the show notes to support that too. He is a noted expert in business process, personal work management, and the application of lean to personal work and life. Jim believes that the best process is the least process necessary to achieve goals. He has zero tolerance for process waste. All said, Jim enjoys helping people and teams work out sticky problems, an advocate of people actually seeing their work and inventing new ways to work at the intersection of lean thinking, brain science, and leadership. Are you ready to talk prioritization? It's time for the interview. Jim Benson, welcome back to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Tom.
Jim, I am pumped up. Ever since we actually physically met, it's nearly 2 years ago, I have been jonesing to get you back on the cast, so it is really good that the stars aligned.
Yes.
Jim, priorities. You have done a lot on the how to prioritize, how prioritization might be a symptom, all of those kinds of topics. But before we dive in, let's just let's sort of draw a line in the sand. What the heck, and how do you define what a priority is?
So a priority, in a nutshell, is a relative weight that we give to something about its importance relative to other things, and importance relative to the narrative that we build around that thing.
Is a priority different if we make the thing that we're talking about larger or smaller? So I think based on that definition, I'd say the definition holds whether I'm building a house or correcting a bug in a software program.
Yes, or deciding whether or not you want to use the 8-inch or the 6-inch utility knife.
Can't I use both?
Yeah. So the larger an event is, the more complexity surrounds that event or opportunities for complexity. And that is the thing that messes with our prioritization schemes. So when we decide at the beginning of the year as a large corporation, we're going to undertake these 5 major projects out of these 15 or 20, those are very, very large bets with a lot of opportunities for failures in definition, in shared understanding, in opportunities for execution, and all those types of things. If we're just deciding I'm going to prioritize using this knife over that knife, or I'm going to choose this knife rather than that knife, the opportunities for failure there are relatively low. So we tend to get together and prioritize things as in groups in kind of political situations or settings, and not actually talk about them on their merits.
Why do we do that? I mean, it would seem that the merits are really where we would want to focus on in terms of prioritization. Maybe we call that value, maybe we call that something else. So is it just whether we call it politics or whoever yells the loudest? Why do we fall down in that hole so easily?
What's insidious about this is that falling down the hole and politics, we think of those as necessarily as arguing, which they certainly can be, or personality-driven decision making, or elements of control. But they can also be as simple as, okay, so we've decided to get together and stack rank these 15 things based on these 3 different metrics. Where did those metrics come from?
Mm.
Are those metrics valid? Do those metrics paint the full range of opportunities and decisions, opportunities for decision that you're going to make? And when you're setting something up as a priority, what is the context in your implementation path for that you are engaged in? So if you're saying we are going to commit to doing these 5 things and only these 5 things over the next 12 months, then as you go forward and start doing them and you learn things like this is a really bad idea, you are much more unlikely to stop doing them. When you know you're in that situation, when you're originally making those decisions or setting those priorities, that becomes part of your decision making. So you're much more likely to be worried and fretful about the choices that you're making, which will also change the choices that you make. So you'll make either choices that you believe are safer, or perhaps choices that you believe that somebody else will absorb the risk of, rather than making a choice saying, you know what, we're going to investigate this for a while. We're going to start working on it. And then if it doesn't work, we're going to choose one of these other options.
How can somebody else absorb the risk?
Let's say that I am project manager A and there's project manager B. And I recognize that project A is highly likely to be completed successfully. So I'm going to take on that one, and I'm going to let project manager B absorb the risk in taking the other one. And what's interesting about these is usually there's someone out there to argue very vehemently that they should take on that risk.
Yes.
So, yeah. But what ends up happening then is that any number of weird dysfunctions can happen after that. But what didn't happen is nobody stopped and said, hey, so this thing that we're about to prioritize, we're about to commit to, do we really understand what implementing this thing is going to look like? What spikes can we run? What tests can we run? What experiments can we run in order to begin to test this one, because we understand that this one has a great deal more potential complexity than this other one. So we'll choose the other one outright. We all feel very comfortable with it. We're going to give it a certain amount of attention. But the other is exciting, for lack of a better word.
Right.
And the reason this is important is that these dynamics are what leads to certain behavior in the decision-making process and the prioritization process that aren't necessarily helpful for conducting business in the best way possible. And so that's like kind of on a grand scale,
right.
And then kind of to bring this back down to like the individual level. What ends up happening on the individual level for us is kind of a microcosm of this. We end up with a lot of different things in our backlog or in our options column. We could be working on any number of them at a time, and all of those have different levels of politics, completability, knowns and unknowns attached to them. And then we end up usually prioritizing things by either things I can get done before I have to get to this meeting, or things that people are yelling for the loudest, which means that you tend to gather up piles of those potentially complex things. And then when you do them rushed, and the complexity shows up, and either quality or timeliness or your sanity suffers because of it.
Isn't what you're describing just a procrastination methodology that in essence stops those things that are complex and therefore take more brain power or more coordination to get done? It just postpones them ever getting done in some cases.
Well, yes, and it does that because we haven't given ourselves the bandwidth to pay appropriate attention to those tasks. And the reason that we get in that situation is because we have overcommitted, which means that we have, if you will, either under or over prioritized, depending on how you look at it.
Why would that turn out to be under or over prioritizing? I could see it being, well, it depends, I guess, on what you define as over prioritizing. I could see it being under.
So in this case, under prioritization could just mean that you didn't adequately prioritize the complex work and prioritize it in such a way that you allowed yourself bandwidth. Over prioritization in this case would mean that you went into a prioritization meeting with others and you gave yourself a whole bunch of priorities to work on. So we'll just say overly aggressive prioritization, and then you left yourself overcommitted. Or conversely, someone else left you overcommitted.
Yeah, the inability to say no or the ability to say yes to everything probably is one of those problems. You described prioritization as a symptom of other problems that don't get solved necessarily when you wrestle with prioritization. Could you share a little bit of that with the listeners? And by the way, the listeners, I think, should all go out and find, that was a video. It was late last year.
It's on YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's called Prioritization as a Symptom. I mean, it literally is just that. But the notion is that whenever people call us up and say, you got to come in and help us with our prioritization, we can't prioritize anything. That's a symptom. That's not a prioritization problem. It's not like you've become like inept at stack ranking. It's that you fundamentally don't understand the context of your work and the capacity of you and your team or teams to actually complete that work. It's not like being overworked at the office is anything new, but as the internet has become more internety and ubiquitous, our ability to, actually just the number of things that we could be doing has become nearly infinite.
Sure.
And so it's not like anymore. It's like I wrote this memo and I put it in the letter in the envelope, and it's going to take 3 days to get to Chicago and 3 days back. Now I sent this email 2 seconds ago. Why haven't I got a response back? So we used to have kind of just a natural break and ability to think, just given the slowness of communication. But now it's like you could be doing anything at any time. And the outgrowth of that is that people have tons and tons of things that they could be prioritizing. And what they're not doing is saying, we have a cap for processing. And processing doesn't mean the amount of time I can spend at my computer. It means the amount of time I can thoughtfully.
That's different?
It's incredibly different. So the amount of time you can thoughtfully complete stuff might make you do crazy things like go for a walk or drink a cup of coffee or stare off into space and actually process. So it's funny because when I'm making a video for a class and I'm in Adobe Premiere and it becomes time to generate the video and I click the thing and it starts to render the video, there is a period of time where the computer has to think really hard about that video, and it could take anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour depending on what's going on in the final product. We never give human beings that time.
No, because they don't look busy if they're doing that. That's
right. So it was like even on Star Trek, Data from time to time had to do things like accessing. He had to he had to verbally say, "My brain is working," to do something, and humans don't give themselves that option. And so what happens is, we wonder why The last couple of years, I've had the blessing of working in the construction industry. And the construction industry, like all industries, worries about quality and worries about timeliness. But if let's say we got a $500 million office building that's going in New York, if that's not done on time, the penalties for that are measured in millions of dollars a day. So they're not insubstantial.
Mm-hmm.
So they will do things to finish on time. Yeah, they have quality issues and stuff like that. But in the end, a building is delivered that people can use. In the software industry, we release crap on a regular basis, like now on a continuous basis, because we have continuous deployment. So we can now give you crap every second. And what we're not focused on is was that not crappy when I hit the button? And a big part of that, I mean, there's a lot of parts of that because it's an incredibly dysfunctional industry. But a big part of that is just, do we have time to actually think about what we're releasing, or are we constantly panicked to get stuff out?
If we cycle that back, then that suggests that prioritization, to do it well, I think you have to have a feedback loop. And secondly, there are things that you have to know, like capacity, like what your batch size should be, like what your work in process should be. Are those all the criteria, or are there other things that are equally as important?
That's the big SCI question. So cycle time, throughput, capacity, understanding those things are the table stakes for being able to get something done. The harder bits are constancy of purpose, understanding the customer, having a shared narrative about what we're building and why. And those are the things that really give context to how we prioritize. So I worked for a group once, and they had a beautiful Kanban set up, and it had everybody was WIP limited, and then there was this one column with like 1 million tickets in it. And I walked up and I looked at the board, and I said, "Hey," and I said, "What?" And I said, "I know where your tester lives."
I wonder what column we're talking about.
And they're like, "Well, yeah, it's that person shared and blah, blah, blah." I was like, "No, you guys have to stop working. And you guys have to start doing testing." And they're like, "We can't do testing because we're software developers." I'm like, "Oh, geez." So the thing is that if we're engaged in the action of releasing a product for human beings for some reason, and we have to hear the voice of the customer, but also we have to work as a group. So DevOps was nothing more than just saying, could you have devs and ops talk to each other?
Yeah.
All right. Now we have DevOps groups and certifications and crap because it's really that hard to get people to talk to each other. And so it's like, could we be polite throughout the whole chain? And part of that is stop making it a chain. If you're doing real-time release, testing and operations turn into very different things. They turn into part of a work cell for software development. And once you have a good constancy of purpose, like we understand why we're here and who we're building this for, you have a good understanding of what your customers want and need, then prioritization becomes trivial because you're simply serially meeting what the customers need, and you're focused on quality more than you're focused on speed of delivery. So prioritization often ends up being a delivery speed proxy and therefore a dysfunction, therefore a symptom. Your symptom of needing to prioritize is born entirely because you have built an ineffective delivery mechanism. And I will avoid the rant about time boxing there, which usually comes next.
Okay. We are late in the business cycle, and usually at this point in the business cycle or in in the near future, people will start leaning down organizations, and therefore software teams will suddenly have multiple masters that they're dealing with. That level of complexity challenges the whole idea of constancy of purpose, because the only purpose is, in that case, probably to focus on delivery speed. So quality goes out the window. We've added that another layer of complexity in there. Is there a method other than just not doing it to avoid that complexity in terms of prioritization, so that we don't put aside everything that's hard? But also, complexity sometimes says that there's a potential upside to go with it.
So prioritization in this case, without understanding capacity, is always going to end in overload 100% of the time, because there's always going to be more to do than there is the capacity to get it done. In this case, when an organization has a shared resource, and we'll say it's their app dev group, and that app dev group has, as you put it, many masters. So when we were working with a client in Milwaukee, we did an exercise called Count the Bosses, and the guy that won had 17 bosses.
Oh, no.
He won. Congratulations.
What was the prize?
The prize was literally a hug. I am so sorry, man. But beyond that, the prize was to take that person's message and the others like that person, and to say, hey, this isn't sustainable. So when the organization gets into a panic state and believes that it can do more than it can, the hard message is that it can't. So the only way out of that isn't to prioritize work in that this work is necessarily more important than other work, but it's to say we're going to work very hard now to understand the context of, or the narrative of, these projects, how they relate to each other, how they relate to the customer, how they relate to the predicament that we are now in. So there may be things that the company has really wanted to do all year long, and now they are in this predicament, and the best that they can do is tread water. Or the best that they can do are meet one or two pressing needs. But then you set up a system where you say, we are going to prioritize these, but the priority means that we are going to handle them serially, and we are going to put them into buckets. So these buckets are going to be completed in as small a batches as we possibly can. So you just understand, you as person who has pet project, the smaller you can make that pet project, the more refined you can make that pet project, the more likely we are to be able to accept it into the stream. So if you have a year-long project and right now we're under the gun, the answer is just no. If you have a year-long goal that you can divide up into 1, 2, or 3 month chunks, then the closer you get to 1 month, the answer is probably. And what we are going to do is we're going to take things that are going to give us the biggest bang for the buck, the things that we believe are the most completable, the things that will allow us to show progress to our investors and our customers. And we are going to complete those things. And when we complete one, then we're going to move on to the next. And what we're not going to do is set them up now from 1 to 92, but what we're going to do is set up bucket number 1 that has 5 projects in it. And then after we're done with them, we're going to get together and reprioritize what goes into bucket number 2. And the reason that we're going to do that is because context is going to change for us literally every week, because we are under the gun. Okay. One of the things that we know is that the more pressure you put on the organization, the higher the turnover is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to plan out a really long project when we're all freaking out, when we know, even though we're doing everything we can to avoid it, that we are going to lose some key people over the next couple of months. We don't want to commit to getting stuff done when we know that we're in that particular situation. we also don't know what opportunities are going to come up. People are inventing stuff all the time. So we lock ourselves into one, massive, geodatabase overhaul. And then we get to 3 months into it, we find out that ESRI completely changes the system. We don't want to dedicate ourselves to something like that when we're in trouble. So prioritization, and this should be the way it always works, but when you're under the gun, you can either kill everybody in the group or you can turn that into an opportunity to say, hey, what if we actually worked in small batches, focused on quality, immediate delivery of value, and turn that into our scheme to prioritize?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Before we wrap up, though, that I think makes a lot of logical sense. Except the basic human nature always seems to be, in that circumstance, I'm going to ask for everything instead of breaking it into smaller. How would you educate? Because that sounds like an education, and maybe I'm trying to think of this too logically. Maybe there's an emotional appeal that would make more sense.
So from the mechanistic side, you build a system that can only ingest work that is appropriately defined. And that appropriate definition means those things that I said before, completable, not a lot of scary things in them and so forth. So that's the mechanistic side. But the emotional, the behavioral, the psychological side of that is what can we do as app dev, as the CTO, as the CIO, as the people who are the standard bearers for proving that this leap of faith is important, is how quickly can you deliver value back to the internal customers so that they can say, okay, I know that previously when I gave something to app dev, it took them 2.5 years to finish, but now I see that they're regularly finishing things every month. My thing's going to come up in the next bucket. I feel safe with that. And the last bit for that comes in a story, and it is one of my favorite stories now. And it chokes me up, and it's funny because it's from like massive construction projects, which shouldn't choke you up. But in construction, the major process was the yell and cuss and berate process. So if something went wrong, you would pull the subcontractor into your office and you would treat them like crap until they were a quivering bunch of jello, and then you would send them out and they would do whatever it was that you wanted them to do. And there was a particular project in New York, and we were in a meeting, and somebody asked the lean director for this company in New York, said, hey, Doug, what is the project that you would send people to where they could see like the best implementation of lean and the right environment and safety and so forth? And he said, I would send you over to this project over in Brooklyn. And everybody knew what the project was, and they looked at him like, seriously? And he's like, yeah, seriously. And they looked really confused. And so I said, well, isn't so-and-so the project executive over there? And we said, yeah. And he said, but that guy's an asshole. And so I went over and had a chat with him. And I said, hey, I learned something this morning. I learned that you're an asshole. And he laughed and he said, yeah, it's true. I am an asshole. And I was like, but I've always known you as this wonderful guy. And he says, here's what happened. He says, for 30 years, I've been, growing my career and am now, a project executive on this huge project. And he said, I made my career by yelling and screaming and berating people. And when we started this project, we did two things. One is we started using all these visual systems to communicate with everyone so they all knew what was going on. When the trades came in, they know what they're supposed to be doing every day, how they're supposed to stay safe. We plan things up front so nobody's surprised. He says, that's different. That's never happened before. He said, but most important was when we started the project, we had one rule, which was no yelling in the trailer. And that's all it took. So this guy had made a career out of being belligerent it was the system and the construction of the system that rewarded that behavior. And when people say, I'm just going to pile work on to IT or app dev, that is the same situation that they're working under. Who wants to live like that? No one wants to live like, I'm scared to death app dev's not going to give me something. So this particular person had to see that when you put up a couple of visual controls, you had a couple meetings up front with the trades, that your relationship with them would improve considerably. So yeah, we want better relationships with app dev and the internal customers, but let's just take app dev internally. They got to clean up their own house. They got to get off this stupid notion that going to a DevOps course is going to fix things for them. And they need to get together and say, we are people who define work, do work, make sure the work is whole, and deploy work. And we as a group are a cross-functional team that do this. The cross-functional team isn't just the devs, and it's not just the testing group. It is the whole value stream. And that they have to work out those social structures, those social contracts on their own before they can ever have the cojones to stand up to the rest of the company and say, this is what's going on. And I have not seen Kanban do this. I haven't seen DevOps do this. I haven't seen Lean do this. I haven't seen Agile or Scrum or XP or DAD or SAFe or any of the other 550,000 process religions out there. I haven't seen any of them just get people to sit down and treat each other like human beings, except for maybe Bob Marshall, who's just like, sitting in London going, could y'all just please treat each other better? So when we talk about prioritization, it's not just the work. It's the social, it is the procedural, it is the technical, the technological, it is the full context of what we're doing. And when we run into problems of prioritization, when we claim we have a problem, and the same thing's true with trust. Trust and prioritization are two huge watchwords for me that just say you have a broken social structure. You don't fully understand how your work works. And there's a lot of reasons why in software this ends up being a problem, not the least of which being the notion of software craftspersonship, is that we need to start treating this like a real profession and not like hacking, which is probably a overly snippy thing to say. But I just see it time and again. I see a lot of hackers, and I don't see a lot of people actually being software engineers.
And I think it's harder to say the word software or the phrase software engineer these days than it used to be. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think those things are true. Jim, if you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you a cup of coffee, cup of tea, whatever works, and a magic wand and said you could fix any two things that affect how work is done, what would you change and why?
I would change two things. One is I would want people to feel like they were engaged in not in work, but in an endeavor. That when they came into the office, that they were there to cooperate, collaborate, learn, improve, and mold and shape the best service or product possible for the person who was going to use it. And I would want them to do that. The second thing would be in an atmosphere of copious respect and curiosity. You've heard me say this before, but a process is individuals interacting. And they usually engage that process through tools. So the key phrase of the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions over process and tools, basically says people talking without understanding what they're talking about. I am not popular in that belief.
but we all see it.
Yeah, but it's really important to me, because process is the social contract by which we get work done. And when we get work done at the office, that is when we are fulfilled and we're happy with what we've done. As professionals, we feel professional pride in what we've finished when we're able to actually finish something of quality. And I meet a lot of software people who don't like themselves or their work because they have been complicit in building a system that doesn't allow them to build things of quality.
Jim, this has been absolutely fantastic. If people wanted to continue the conversation, how would they go about doing that?
Well, so we have a new personal Kanban and prioritization class on the Modus Institute site. We will have 4 of them in the end, but the first one is currently up, and that's the Me class. So it's prioritizing our personal work. And it's geared for prioritization where we all find ourselves. We're overloaded. We have too many things that we could be doing right now that feel of equal importance. How do we figure out what the context is of that work and actually make that prioritization happen? I'm pretty happy with it. And then engaging in that is easy. Just, have conversations in the actual units. And I guess the other thing is the Why Limit WIP book and the Why Plans Fail book, which individually Why Limit WIP talks about how and why to limit your work in progress, which always involves prioritization. And then the second one, the Why Plans Fail book, is all about cognitive bias, most notably in this case, status quo bias or confirmation bias, both of which lead us to prematurely prioritize and then painfully produce.
Jim, this has been marvelous. Hopefully we don't wait another couple of years. By the way, I walked into somebody's office the other day and found the Why Limit WIP book on their desk or on their cadenza.
Beautiful.
So I took a picture of it. I do mean to send it to you just to say, oh my God, I know him.
It's like somebody's reading it. But what's been great about the books is that they're selling consistently and they're always keeping the conversations alive. I feel a need to put out a new one pretty soon, but when I do that, we're going to talk about that one too.
Absolutely. Jim, thank you very much for coming and visiting and sharing your wisdom with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
Remember to tame your work intake beast. Jeremy Willets and I are celebrating Southern in the Northern Hemisphere with a summer camp. We look at the primary causes of work intake problems and how to solve them week by week. Join us for an entertaining and informative LinkedIn Live event weekly beginning June 19th at 11:30 Eastern Daylight Time. Link in the show notes. It takes you to our Maven page. We'll use that as the registration. Registration isn't necessary, but it will help getting a count for virtual juice boxes. In Reread Saturday News, this week we revisit our first reread from 2015, The Goal, A Process of Ongoing Improvement by Eli Goldratt. If you're interested in the flow of work, you need to read The Goal. Probably more than once. Next week, we'll be back to the reread of Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow. On the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, we'll be back with more of the story of Innovatech, which we began last week, and what happens when responsibility and accountability get muddled. We'll also have a visit from John M. Quigley and his Alpha and Omega of product development. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?